Every lie contains a seed of the truth. It is only this seed of truth that gives the lie power. For a lie is powerless on its own. It is nothing but a lack of truth. It is only truth that gives power, and so in order for a lie to have power, it must have a seed of truth in which to build itself upon. So, from a narrative perspective and from a political organizing perspective, and from a talking to people perspective, this is important to understand. If someone is saying something to us that seems to us to be a lie on one level or another, the thing to do, rather than to point out what appear to us anyway to be obvious fallacies, is to attempt to figure out what is the truth within this lie. What is that seed of truth, that grain of truth? And to extract it, and to address yourself to that seed of truth. Because it is that seed of truth that is attracting the person to the lie in the first place. And so, if you would draw them away from the lie, you must figure out what it is that's attracting them to it. That is that seed of truth within it. You extract it and you recontextualize it. You take that seed of truth and you place it within a whole body of truth. And that is how you bring somebody over. You do not approach somebody who has been taken by a lie that they were attracted to, due, as we said, to this grain of truth within it. You do not come to such a person and attack them for believing that which is false. We all believe things which are false, and of necessity we are all unaware of the fact that we are believing false things while we are believing them. This is part of being a human being. It is inescapable. And so if we are to judge others because they are believing things that are untrue or incorrect, well, we are opening ourselves up to this exact same judgment, and for the same reasons. Have there not been times and places in all of our lives when we have been more or less mistaken? When we have pronounced more or less confidently something that turned out to be in fact not true? So we should not jump to judgment. We should, of course, as always, struggle to display discernment rather than judgment. Judgment may in fact be warranted, but that should not be the first reaction. First reaction should be to try to determine what is the seed of truth there. What is the legitimate concern? What is the legitimate worry? What is the legitimate fear? Extract that, recontextualize it, represent it, reflect it back to them, lift it up, show your approval of it vocally. That is the way that you get somebody on your side. You've just listened to them tell you something that strikes you as a lie. If you know already what the seed of truth is that is attracting them, or if you have a good idea, you can immediately go to the recontextualization of said truth. Name it, lift it up, show your joint approval, shared approval for it, and then recontextualize it. If, however, you hear something that is a lie or strikes you as such from somebody else, and you do not know immediately what is the grain of truth, what is that core that is attracting them, you must then go into questioning mode, and you must legitimately be asking questions, not in a kind of Socratic sense of, I already know the answer, and I'm trying to get you to accept it, but rather in the clinical diagnostician sense of, I am trying to discern something about you that is not obvious. So, if you meet, for instance, happen to have a conversation, find yourself in conversation with someone who is a supporter of a political candidate from a party that you did not vote for or who you do not approve of, the most constructive thing you can do if you wish to engage in any kind of political conversation with this person is not to berate them for their political preference or choice, but is to ask them, what is it about this candidate that attracted you? Why do you feel compelled to vote for them, or why do you give your support to them? And then you can know. Now, you might also ask yourself why it is that you are supporting your own political candidate. You should probably be fairly clear, very clear on that for yourself as well. But it's always going to be more constructive to actually find out why people are supporting someone. Now, as my view is that all politicians, especially on the national level, but generally on the even state or county level, are more or less narcissists who will say whatever they need in order to further their political ambitions and extra political ambitions. So I assume that anybody who is taking a politician at their word is, at the very least, somewhat naive, maybe somewhat ill-informed, but that is no reason to judge anybody for that. That is the natural state for all of us. And being naive just shows that you are, in fact, a good-hearted person. You just have a hard time imagining other people who are not. That is kind of what being naive means. So it's not entirely a bad thing. It at least points to something positive in your character. But I will ask somebody, what is it that attracts them to a candidate? Perhaps they tell you without being prompted, or to some political ideology. It works the same. And then take that, see if there is some way in which you can find a way to agree with it. Perhaps there is not, in which case you probably need to no longer be speaking with this person. But if there is, or if you just outright agree with it, it's just an admirable, sentiment that they've just contextualized in kind of a messed up way. Again, lift up that sentiment, show that you also approve of it, and recontextualize it for them. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, maybe you change your mind, maybe you don't, but this is the highest probability, gives you the highest probability of actually having an effect on somebody's thinking, in my experience. Purely anecdotal, I must say. I can't point to any particular studies to back this up, just my own experience of conversing with lots of people with lots of different political ideologies, and generally having a pretty good time getting them to agree with me on some, what I would think are fairly radical things, but you can, again, walk people step by step if you know how to do it. I mean, this is how people are brought to believe in untruths, of course, right? Again, even an outright grifter, con man, who knows exactly what they're doing, or con woman, our political sphere and our economic sphere are rife with both. They understand this principle, and so they will latch on to a truth, and then they will proceed to build upon that a structure which is beneficial to themselves or to their financial backers, and which people will go along with because it is built upon this seed of truth. So this is simply, again, a truth, a fact of human psychology, it seems to me, social psychology, neither good nor bad, but rather just something to be aware of and a tool to use. And as there are already people who use this sort of tool and understanding for ill, it should be available for others to use for good as well. Another benefit of this searching for the seed of truth within the lie is that you put yourself, if you approach difficult political or social conversations in such manner, you put yourself in a situation where the other person is more likely to have positive feelings towards you, or at the very least no negative feelings. But in general, when people ask us about ourselves and ask us about our opinions, that is somewhat flattering, has a sort of naturally flattering effect. And so we tend to like people who flatter us. And if we already have sort of a generally positive vibe towards somebody, we are much more likely to listen to something that they might say that does not agree with us, or at least not react as negatively as we might otherwise. And so by starting out with questions rather than statements or, God forbid, judgments, you are putting yourself in a more advantageous situation in regards to actually being able to have a useful conversation with this person. Now, one thing that I learned, and that many people learned as a young political organizer and activist, was to separate people into three categories: yes, no's, and maybes. Yeses being people who already agreed with you, were already on board. No's being people who did not agree with you and were never going to agree with you. And maybes being those people who were fence sitters, or who had never really thought about it, or who didn't have a particularly well-formed opinion, or could go either way. That last group, the maybes, were the only ones, as political organizers and political activists, that we were encouraged to spend any time at all talking to or interacting with. You don't need to talk with the yeses, you don't need to spend time on the yeses because they're already on our side. You don't need to spend time talking to the no's because it doesn't matter what you say, it's going to be a fruitless endeavor trying to get them onto our side. It is the maybes that you focus on. And this is very good advice for people who consider themselves to be political activists, whether online or IRL, as they say. But there is one situation, or there are certain situations in which it may in fact make sense to spend time conversing with a no. And that is if you can use the conversation with the no, with the person who is a no, as a way of performing or showing your ideology to people who might be passing by or overhearing that conversation. Again, whether in real life or online. I call this preaching to the birds, this concept, which I take from, of course, St. Francis of Assisi, or Assisi, perhaps. St. Francis, before he was a saint, was a priest, and he was liable to preach from the pulpit about the benefits of Christian poverty. Now, this was not a message that was particularly popular with the rich funders of the church, and so Francis was barred from preaching from the pulpit. In response to this, he famously went out, and on the roadside he fed the birds, brought some bread crust and gave it to the pigeons, and as the birds gathered round, he began to preach to them on the benefits of Christian poverty, just as he had from the pulpit. Now, hilariously, this has been taken to mean by many people that St. Francis was especially connected to wildlife, and that he could communicate with the birds. But it is quite obvious that what St. Francis was doing was not communicating with birds, but was continuing to preach to people. However, since he was not allowed to do it directly, he found a way to do it indirectly. He still got his message across to the audience that it was intended. That audience was not, however, the one that he was apparently directly addressing, i.e., the birds. No, it was the passers-by on the road who overheard St. Francis's preaching, and it is for that reason that he is still remembered and beloved today. So it is possible, then, to accomplish some good by talking with a no, as it were, if you can remember that you are, in fact, preaching to the birds, and that they are not your actual audience. And so you need to keep in mind how you appear to the other people. And so you should probably refrain from ad hominem attacks, calling people names, making specious arguments, quote-unquote dunking on them is usually not a good look. You want to be making good faith arguments, maintaining your composure, being respectful, and also showing conclusively, rationally, logically why you are correct and your debating opponent is in fact incorrect. But keep in mind, you are not trying to change their mind. You are trying to affect the minds of any maybes who might happen to be passing by. Well, I think those are probably adequate as metapolitical thoughts for this morning. I will be back, or may be back, or won't be back, depending. Learn not to make too many promises anymore, even if it is just promises to the void. Never know what's going to happen. Trying to ride the luck plane through life, so if I have some more thoughts, I'll maybe record them and go through the hassle of putting them up online, and you can perhaps go through the hassle of listening to them and leaving a snarky comment, which I always appreciate.